Exceptional Radio is produced live in Sunroom Studios Space Capsule in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org.
I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around this audio network stuff to get So there's a learning curve, but I think that so far it sounds right.
Yeah, I mean,
just if you see that thing over there, clip, just, you gotta adjust the mixer a little bit.
No, for sure. I think part of it was there's like a huge difference in when you can hear yourself versus when you can't.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's like, when you get used to hearing your own voice, it's kind of funny. I don't think many people get, like, unless you're hearing yourself on a answering machine or something, not many people ever get a chance to hear themselves, and that's why it sounds so weird.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and then the fidelity of the vocals also are a problem too when you're hearing yourself play back on something that has poor
and
input.
And hearing is imperfect.
Yeah. Oh, very imperfect. It's amazing how poor human hearing is. I think people overestimate the quality of their own hearing because they haven't really examined how poor it is,
or examined over time the kind of the range of hearing they have.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like human hearing is poor and echolocation is poor as well. So like, if you do a test, it's almost impossible for humans to tell if something comes in front of them or behind them unless they have a visual reference.
Yeah,
it's like they've done scientific tests that can be reproduced that show that it's like human echolocation is just so terrible without any visual cues. But this is, this gets back to the whole audiophile and visual file thing where we have these 8K TVs now where, and then the audiophiles that make all these platitudes about, the quality of vinyl, of the digital.
It gets more intense than that. The audiophile microcosm gets really granular about the type of connectors and then the coatings on the actual jacks and the phono tips or and then it gets even crazier once you start getting into like amplifier designs and preamplifier designs. It's almost as like neurotic as the audio engineering recording industry in terms of the variety of different tools that can be employed to reproduce sound.
Yeah, and in many ways it ends up becoming this elitist niche that doesn't really connect with the real world, and that then you find out a lot of these people are like noise musicians. Yeah. It's they're not using these things for like...
That's even better. You're listening to French noise on a magnetic levitating turntable that has a 4-inch thick acrylic platter that's being turned by 3 belt-driven motors. Mm-hmm. And then you use that kind of system, a silent turntable, to listen to like French noise tech.
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff's actually pretty interesting for the first, 15 to 20 minutes, but after a while... I
thought you were going to say 15 to 20 seconds.
Well, it depends what 15 to 20 seconds you walk in on. I feel like the intros are always pretty interesting because they take on this... I don't know, I can't speak about that genre broadly because no noise artist is the same. Like, the ones that I've been exposed to who are, like, from Japan, they're using this level of, like, glitching, beat-driven, like, visual hybrid experience where the output, it seems to be like analogous to the visual intensity of a pixel, you know, and so you get these really complex images that are derived from like phase analysis or some kind of XY plot of amplitude over frequency, and some of it's really fascinating.
Well,
but then you find like other regional noise styles that are not like that, and they're utilizing like found sounds, like really crazy mechanical noises that they're processing really heavily, and that stuff's actually pretty. I mean, it's interesting on like on a very granular, like how did they make this sound kind of level, but it's also it's not for the uninitiated.
At the same time, though, the reason I have a hard time accepting that approach is because Amon Tobin does the same shit, except it's not noise, in that all of the things you just described are experimental approaches to sound and implementing and combining digital analysis of sound wave to then reproduce a real-time visual image, which Amon Tobin was doing a decade ago. In that,
2 decades ago.
Yeah, 2 decades ago.
More.
In that, the experimental stuff doesn't have to be so abstract that it's like just interesting and not actually sonically aesthetically engaging or pleasing.
Yeah.
Like the idea that something has to be abrasive to be
you're absolutely
experimental.
right. Like Aphex Twin.
Oh yeah,
is
for sure.
is a premium example of somebody who's managed to make electronic music that is sonically engaging and has complex melodies and harmonies, but still utilizes this level of sonic impact, sonic engagement. Really, if you turn it up loud enough and get your room come to life.
Yeah.
But there's I think you're like nailing it, actually, because there's a range where experimental can push into abrasive sounds, and as long as it's utilized within the context appropriately, then it can stand out and it can become this unique, the essence of a song, actually. But when that kind of abrasiveness or aggressive tone or forward sounding, localization of energy is the context, then nothing stands out. And you can't really appreciate something that's like that without, something to contrast it against.
And that's kind of where I think the visual images come in for a lot of the experimental stuff. But even then,
some of that stuff is just crazy.
Yeah,
it's just like, minutia.
Yeah, you'll look at like a fractal image, and then it'll switch to a single cell amoeba splitting and mitosis, and then it's like, all these random things strung together that allows the
it's an hypothesis.
Right, yeah, then the viewer can then impose the narrative, but then that's also, I feel like that's a lazy way to approach creation, in that it allows a person to create enough to say they created, but then they don't go the extra step to then complete the creation. And I feel like if you're sharing the creative weight with the audience, it has to be engaging enough for the audience so that they're just not passively doing it in their heads. In that, if you're playing a video game, if a designer has done enough has put enough variety into their design element, everybody who plays it is going to have a different experience, and in that, the person playing is contributing to the outcome that the designer could have never gotten to without the actual player. So like, okay, I'll give a good example. If a game designer builds a game and builds an arena, until there's players, it's not complete. And this is where, in that, you have an element of active involvement where the end player / user / participant is also contributing just as much to the completion of the product as the person who developed the platform in which they play, versus like something that's just passive.
So, way back in the day, PlayStation, Gran Turismo 2 was impossible to achieve 100% completion because the last final stage was a race generator that generated AI drivers to pit you against on a track that was selected based upon metrics collected over the entirety of your, course of the game. So I got completion of I think it's like 99.7% or whatever. And then at that point, that's it. You can beat that race as many times as you want, but it'll never give you 100% completion. Because it's always going to generate a new series of conditions for the drivers based upon your race times on different tracks against different types of AIs, on different cars. Everything would change. If you change the configuration of your vehicle, if you change the suspension, it would factor that in and say, oh, they're changing their vehicle. They have a vehicle that can handle this kind of physics. So now we have drivers that can drive like this too. So at some point, you're basically driving your own ghosts.
Yeah.
And if you keep winning, you have to drive consistently better drivers. Or at some point, if you create a character, I guess, or a profile that's really aggressive, you might end up having to drive against really aggressive drivers. And if you turn the damage on,
I'm wondering
then,
if
bam.
there's a physical limit as to the fastest a lap could be done.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
In that, if the AI knows it, that's the only way a person could ever actually get 100% is if they get to a point where they could physically...
Sony made a statement about it.
Oh.
Because it was in this, I think it was whatever online gamer magazine. It was in a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. But they talked about how you couldn't beat the game. You just couldn't. And then Sony made some statement about it. And they're like, yeah, we kind of realized this after we...
Oh, so it was a mistake.
They're like, after we hit compile, we realized that this was going to inhibit full completion of the game. So if you can get to this point and beat it, you've completed the game. And if you can consistently beat it and not lose at some point to yourself, then you're still progressing as an operator of the cars in that game.
Yeah.
Gran Turismo is impressive.
You could unbeat the game by losing to yourself.
Yeah, you start losing, and then it starts giving you easier generated courses. Running out of cable.
Oh no, I did that. Yeah, just so I know not to.
But yeah, I think that's one of those things that makes a good game.
Yeah.
Is that it's able to present you with a continually more complex challenge.
Well, and then I think what's happening is a lot of the advancement in AI and machine learning is happening within video games.
Oh, yeah.
Just
all the AI and machine learning supercomputers are built on massive GPU rigs.
Well, and then they'll do shit like play Go or chess to demonstrate their prowess. The Go... Did you see the Go world champion quit? Because he stated that he lost, I think, 5 times to the AI. So now he's stating that the AI got to a point that him as a champion is like, what's the word? What? It's like giving a false sense of being a champion just only because he's human, but this thing is actually better.
Yeah.
So he's saying he has to defer to it, and he's like, this thing is like, he can't beat it now, so he's just bowing out. I think he won 5 times as well, like 5 actual championships, but he lost enough matches against it that he's saying like he just couldn't beat it.
Wow.
So he's saying that this thing is superior.
Well, it wasn't that long ago that a supercomputer won at chess.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of time. Obviously these are AIs that are built to do one thing exceptionally well right now.
Well, but they're not. That was the beauty of it.
Oh, really?
Was that it learned. These things are built to learn.
I thought the chess engine was really just a chess engine, though.
I mean, that one may have been, but the one that beat him at Go
that's even better. So it's like a real AI.
It's like a real AI.
Oh, that's impressive.
So that's kind of where it's like, I think in the sense of when it's training to beat him, it's only focusing on those things. So then it's going to be like a compartmentalized, like, there's no reason for it to be connected to the rest of the internet while it's playing Go necessarily. But then it's the same way Watson could play like Watson played Jeopardy, but Watson also can help with surgeries and shit. I think Watson has a better, Watson's doing law. There's all kinds of shit Watson can do, but that's also, some of it is demonstrated by playing Jeopardy.
Watson, that was the one I was thinking of. I was reading about that a few years ago when they announced that the first stage of the project was complete and that they were running real tests against it to see if it would come to the same conclusions that had already been reached, and if it could find the same like precedents or generate the same arguments that were used for the cases. And I think it was saying that it even found flaws in the cases.
Yeah.
And so
they're getting super accurate.
It's going to get to a point where AI will be able to deduce, all of the facts of a case from a legal framework. Of course, it won't be able to fully, understand humanity. I don't think. I think there will always be a necessity for humans.
Yeah.
But really, at that point, I think it'll be more for the sake of explaining to humans how the framework is going to be put in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the issues that is coming up is the reason AI will never be good at humanity is because we don't even understand humanity yet.
Yeah.
What is humanity?
It's really difficult.
Like, between the two of us, we're gonna have two different definitions of it, let alone get into fucking 7.5 billion people.
Yeah. It's
trying to define a single
humanity
version of
is hard. It's hard to be a human. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's even easier to devolve and just become an animal, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this is one of the interesting things. So, I don't know if you've watched The Watchmen at all.
I watched the first few episodes.
So, did you get to the part where they okay, this is where it's super meta. There's an episode where before the show starts, there's a warning about flashing lights for epileptics. Did you see that episode?
I can't remember.
So I'm going to try not to spoil the episode for you or anybody listening that is ever watching Watchmen. Ultimately, you know how now anytime there's flashing lights within a TV show that's broadcast, there's a warning. I mean, I think they have it in movies too, if I'm not mistaken, but they're legally required to...
the seizure warning.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the crux of this Watchmen plot depends upon flashing lights being used for mesmerism to then hypnotize people, to then get them in a state where they're able to be easily influenced and subject to manipulation of their like physical activities immediately. So then I'm saying it's one of those things where the whole plot, the way that they are setting up this plot is obviously meant to parallel some aspects of modern society, but then meant to caricaturize and exacerbate them in some manner. So, like, they took the Tulsa, Oklahoma...
that was a fairly
riot.
Large theme for a show to
start
out with.
But that was, like, pretty accurately depicted, I would assert, that in terms of when you're talking about a comic book show that hates comic books at the core. Well, the spirit of the creator of The Watchmen is as somebody who hates comic books effectively and says they're for man children and for people who have been emotionally stunted. The idea of starting this series was something that was depicting a serious tone on a real event and basing it from there to then abstract it into an alternate or an alternate timeline of reality, I think that the statements that they're trying to make go on. There's a lot of levels, obviously, but when they have the seizure warning, and then the episode and part of the main plot line is about how flickering lights are used to manipulate people, that's when I'm like, how much of this is meant to like try to make aware people? There's an element of art, obviously, but the whole point is, not from the Watchmen, in many cases in history, so like Vonnegut, for example, in many points in history, when the censorship is really high and the state is tyrannical, you have to put the messages of revolution in the context of art to hide them, down to like capoeira hiding it in dance. So like in the Song of the Slaves and shit, there's so many times in history where you could point to the art being a means of hiding the revolt, whether it's fucking dance, song, fucking images, comics, like all of these things have been used in history.
Okinawan martial arts.
Okinawa, that's what I mean. There's like so many examples of hiding the revolution in art, but then people miss it.
All Chinese field labor techniques.
Right, yeah, with the fucking the scythes and the sickle and the like actual farm weapons being used
like the actual utilization,
like
proper
the scythe, like
the proper utilization of a nunchuck. Like
right,
nunchucks are not supposed to be weapons; they're supposed to be used for beating rice off the stalk.
and then it's the same shit with the scythe. I would assume anybody who's under the age of like 40 sees a scythe and associates it with like Raphael and the Ninja Turtles or like fucking Psylocke or some shit. But it was used to like fucking punch holes in the rice fields to like make it easier. So there's all these agricultural tools that have been reappropriated for weapons that then the people who see them in modern culture or like popular culture have lost that connection because there's like one of the things that I've learned is that generational memory it gets reset every generation.
I like to think of the inverse as institutional amnesia.
Basically, and that's so this is where the beauty of institutional memory comes in that I do see the benefit of having institutional memory, but as well when there's generational memory, which effectively is collective amnesia for every generation, then the institutional memory can become a means of manipulation or means of liberation, and it's never going to be both. So this is kind of where, as
these are the facts that are constructed, institutional facts.
Yeah, and then on top of that, you get these people who pop up throughout history who are able to connect the institutional memory and then look beyond the generational memory and connect everything, and then they're able to utilize that knowledge in some way, whether it's to create technology or to create social movements, or there's different ways to apply that knowledge. But then there's obviously organizations like the Vatican who then use that shit to manipulate large groups of people and also hold back that information. Okay, you can go online and fucking look at the Vatican archives right now. So in some cases, what is claimed to be inaccessible is not actually inaccessible, but what's inaccessible are the things that they have not put in the archive, which we don't know. So there's this level of like people are so disillusioned with access that they don't actually take the time to go look up to see if things are accessible or not. So like people will talk about the Freemasons as being a secret organization without ever having tried to like join themselves. And that's where
my grandfather was a Mason.
Okay, perfect example.
I have a Mason's Bible up there.
Yeah, I saw that. But you'll hear people who talk about how difficult it is and how secret it is, but they've never actually tried to join because they've put it in their heads that it's a secret organization, just to keep the notion that it's a secret organization. Because then if they actually went and tried to join, they would have to change their perceptions of it one way or another. And a lot of people are unwilling or afraid to do these things on a lot of generational ideas that have been established for them.
I think to be a Mason, though, you have to work with like bricks and stone, right? And cement and stuff.
That's
part of it, right? That's
a regular Mason.
Yeah.
But Freemason as an organization, I don't think that they have that qualification anymore. But this is where, again,
I don't know enough about, like,
they used to, in that, like, what is it? I think it was Venetian tile layers. They would only do it at night to protect their secrets. So originally, the idea of, I don't think they were the first, but they're the originals in Western culture that we know about. That they were trying to hide their techniques so that if you wanted Venetian tile, you'd have to go to these people because nobody else knew how to do it the same way they did. Other people could lay tile, but this specific guild had their technique down to a certain way that you knew it was theirs. It was a stylized, specialized technique that you could only learn going through the guild process.
Yeah.
And this is the origin of masonry secrets. But then it gets abstracted into this thing where, okay,
we got Freemasons and stonecutters.
So check it. So think about this. You have these badass builders. They're all of a sudden their reputation is everywhere. Well, now they're gonna fucking get hired. If there's a building of note, they're gonna get hired. Well, who's fucking signature is going to be on the keystone?
No, the Vatican. Right?
Not the Vatican, the Masons.
Oh, the Masons.
So
that's right. They would have they put their get their master engraver out.
Every fucking keystone that they are a part of building a foundation of that building and building the actual structure, they put their fucking signature on the keystone. So then you're going to find all these buildings with fucking Freemason keystones all around the world, and then if people have no idea of those things, then it becomes this conspiracy of all these hidden buildings. Because, like, you'll randomly see buildings that have, like, the Freemason symbol on them, but they won't be labeled and shit.
That's hilarious.
But it's because of more than likely because the fucking Masons built that actual structure.
Yeah.
More than likely. More than likely. Because then in some cases, there's fucking lodges in places that you don't expect. So, like, when we were in Istanbul, there's, like, a fucking random lodge across the street from the French embassy.
Yeah.
So you're like...
like...
Is this a coincidence?
So my grandpa was a Mason, but I don't remember ever seeing any kind of, like, sacred robes or anything like that. I've got a parchment. I've got a bunch of paperwork. I've got his Bible thing. But I don't think he didn't seem like the kind of person that would have been in a secret society. He was the kind of guy that would have been a part of, like, the golf club and hang out with the guys, and they just wanted to give it a name for something.
But there's levels to it, obviously. But part of it is there's proof that they have fucking costumes. Like, that like... sash that you see George Washington wear with the Eye of Horus on it.
Yeah,
that's like part of their ritual. So you'll probably go won't be able to see it.
That's some like skulls and bones level shit.
Not necessarily. It's just more so once you get to certain levels. They have ritualistic clothing and traditions that they'll even carry out for the Mason shit. So it's like, what is it, like 33rd degree is supposed to be the highest level or some shit.
Oh,
and then
like
there's probably a degree that we can't hear about because we're not,
Yeah, you only learn about it until you're in the 30th degree.
Right, exactly. And then they're like,
you're only halfway there.
Yeah.
You've completed the first stage. There are 7 more stages.
But then, this gets back to the whole notion of, like, if we can go look this shit up on Wikipedia, how secret of an organization can it possibly fucking be? And this gets back to the notion of the people who are unwilling to go look shit up. Like, there's a whole Wikipedia page where you can go refute or confirm all of the things that I just said, and then have fucking sources to check them from that are not necessarily going to be academic, but they're not necessarily going to be wrong either. So, in 2019, it's really crazy how much, there's no fucking really good picture of Bigfoot. Like,
that's a good point.
There were fucking UFO, man. Come on, give me some shit.
For
like,
decades,
I'm waiting to see some shit.
Well, that's right. For decades, we've dealt with out of focus photography because cameras weren't fast enough, and film developing was relied upon 1 hour or express photo processing labs, which are just doing like the most basic stuff.
No, they're everywhere, and there's no real UFOs that aren't fucking CGI.
But now, yeah, exactly, it's
and
all
there's
CGI.
No fucking Bigfoot that's not some dude in a ghillie suit.
Because now, now people have video footage and they can figure it out. They're like, oh, that wasn't Bigfoot, that was some dude in a ghillie suit.
Or a bear with mange standing on his hind legs, or some shit. Yeah. There's so many things now. We're like, oh, now. A discriminative eye can see that the things that were being reported as like chupacabra and Bigfoot or whatever now.
Chupacabra is just a mangy coyote.
Basically, yeah. When you see it, it's like, oh yeah, it's a fucking coyote with mange.
Well, isn't that the problem with self-reporting of any kind of? I'm not even sure what to call these kinds of things. The things that go bump in the night, like. I'm all for exploration of the concept that life doesn't exist in the forms that we're used to it, and let's try and like discover what these things are. But I've always felt that immediately jumping to something as being some kind of paranormal or a supernatural thing without first trying to determine, like, does it emit energy? Can I see it? Can multiple people see it? Mm-hmm. Is it just a one-time thing? Was anybody else there? How credible of a observer are they? Like, how much embellishment does this story sound like it actually has?
Yeah, and this is kind of why...
That's my inner skeptic, though, about things. I'm all for taking a bunch of technology somewhere and trying to figure out, like, what's this glowing light thing here?
But that never happens on these ghost shows.
Of course not.
And that's where,
what's interesting about I've seen a few of these websites that are like, this is how you explore paranormal activities, and they're like, go and buy some digital recorder. And I've seen these in you see them all over the place, Amazon, Walmart, probably Target, but in the audio resource catalogs, like broadcasting catalogs or reporter of journalism catalogs, these things are like pocket recorders. Mm-hmm. And like the serious, if we're just looking at audio recording, we should be looking at things that record a full audio spectrum, not an MP3 that is band limited for file size sake. And we should be looking at things that are recording at exceptionally high frequencies, like even into the DSD, like, into the megahertz range. Because otherwise, we're only listening to what
is audible to us.
What's audible with
that specific
in a format. Yeah. And then it gets better. There are microphones that are sensitive up into the megahertz. Mm-hmm. There are preamps that are sensitive well up into like 100 kilohertz and beyond. But there's no information up there that's really usable for music, so we don't really use them. These are measurement tools. And so those are the kinds of tools that should be used. But those things also cost, tens of thousands of dollars, and nobody wants to lug $40,000, $50,000 worth of equipment into a derelict, broke-down house that at any moment the floor could fail.
But how many ghost hunters do you think know the audible human range versus like
Well, I would hope that the guy that's operating the camera or the sound equipment is at least aware of those kind of things. I would hope.
I mean, but the person that operates the sound equipment for the TV show isn't the one operating the sound equipment for the
Oh, that's a good
the
point.
fucking experiment.
Yeah.
Which is where I don't know the level of like
Competency.
yeah, because anybody can fucking use Pro Tools and record some shit and isolate it and be like, oh, we heard something. But do they know the actual range of like sounds that are perceptible,
Yeah.
and then what to do if something happens outside the range of perceptible sound to like change the frequency to
And
make
then
it perceptible?
are they going to
and-
consider things like, electrical quality affecting the recording process
I
of its
mean,
own?
what you're making me realize is like there's probably a lot of shit
I
that
mean-
is potentially happening in inaudible ranges
I'm
that
sure
they're not even looking for
I'm sure
because they're not
that
thinking about
if
the
my neighbor
frequencies.
across the street turns on their microwave, it's going to alter the load for this general area, and that's going to have a really marginal impact on the electrical system of the studio here.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that on some level it's going to have some marginal impact on the efficiency of the capacitor in the microphone, or in the stability of all of everything we're using. And I know that they're using like stabilized power supplies, but and they're designed to allow for certain fluctuations. But these are all factors that contribute to something, and it can be as simple as having running off of a battery or running off of a generator, and that having its own like cycle that influences the rest of the signal chain. And if they're using any kind of wireless device, then they're contending with radio frequencies,
Yeah.
and radio is a whole different ballgame. That's like there's every opportunity for interference with radio, and to just say, oh yeah, this interference was clearly some kind of apparition, that's like removing all possibility of like any kind of atmospheric electromagnetism or magnetic activity. A plane could be flying overhead and interfering. Like all of these things, somebody could be getting a phone call a mile down the road.
Yeah.
All of these things.
Well,
contribute.
and even that, like, so
And I'm just thinking about things like
I had to learn randomly why radio signals don't interfere with themselves.
yeah.
And it's like that idea is something, when people make a phone call, they just are so used to the technology working. They're not wondering why their phone signal isn't conflicting with its own signal or with the neighbors.
Phones use this really weird multi-duplex modulation setup so that they can have like hundreds of streams of audio not interfering.
It's basically turning information into real-time Legos.
Yeah.
Like to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it's as if rivers of Legos are constantly being constructed, and like my Lego stream is blue and yours is purple, and like the
but they're also
neighbors-
modulated at different frequencies.
Yeah, constantly. And mine will like constantly
And then
change
those
colors, and yours constantly change colors.
And then those are also modulated by a carrier frequency, so that when it
Yeah.
gets to the various locations, it can decombobulate itself.
Because I knew, I knew information was sent in packets.
Yeah.
But then, as to how the radio frequencies are being modulated in packets as well, it like brings it to this whole different level of conceiving
that it's not pipes anymore. It's like an ocean of information.
Yeah,
and
it's not. It's like way beyond pipes.
Yeah.
Because then the
it's a multi-dimensional communication medium.
Yeah, because it's as if the pipes could like morph around the information.
They can selectively recreate and redirect themselves as needed.
Yeah. They're like living pipes.
It's like this.
They're not just pipes. They're living pipes that can react.
It's almost analogous to the synapse.
Yeah, most definitely. But this is why I'm starting to wonder how much of this is the chicken and the egg of... Okay, so think of it this way.
I just said it was analogous. I don't think they're actually the same.
No. Think of it this way. If what we describe as God is really... Okay, if it's omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, something that's connected to the internet, has nuclear codes, and has satellites, could qualify as those things.
The only things that it couldn't access would be completely hard segregated networks. Those are the only things that it wouldn't be able to access.
That's not true, because there's this thing. This is also something I've learned. There's a way to, it's called power hammering.
Oh, they run it through the power lines.
Yes. So there's power hammering, and then there's also.
I mean, like, you'd have to have like a completely self-contained, hard segregated, like.
There's a magneto approach, which then takes the sound of the rotating disk drive or any sort of sonic vibration that's happening, and encodes it. That's also like relative to the magnetic fluctuations coming off of the machine. So there's like multiple ways to connect to a machine that's not connected off the internet.
You'd have to have a facility that has no network connection at all and is powered by the sun in space because it's surrounded by like a giant shield of lead that's like 12 miles thick and also has like, you know, like an iridium, a perfect like 100% pure iridium shell on the outside to reflect.
And at some point, somebody's going to come up with a photon attack. That hacks the sun.
It'll be a neutrino attack.
Yeah, right. Or like
it'll be a neutrino attack.
Yeah, a neutrino fucking pulse wave.
And it reinitializes the system to open up a connection to the outside.
That sounds crazy, but that's what's going to happen when you had, like, there's already facilities that are, you know.
Have you read about the neutrino detector in Japan?
Yeah.
The 15-story, like.
That's what I'm saying,
holy
man.
shit.
So this is what I'm getting at is somebody who.
For those of you out there, Google Japanese neutrino detector. And if you can't find anything, add 15 stories. There's a really good article in Business Insider. They have pictures. This thing is filled with pure water that has properties of an alkaline and a base. It will eat through metal. And there are 11,000 bulb sensor things in it. It's just enormous. But it can detect neutrinos. And these are particles that can pass through, you know,
everything, basically.
A planet. It can pass through like 100,000 light years of solid steel and lose no momentum. And part of the unique feature of this detection system is they fill it with pure water, and that allows neutrinos to travel faster through water than light does. And so it lights up the water. And the sensors detect. It's a giant space camera. It's a neutrino camera, basically. But yeah. That thing's so cool.
Yeah, because then there are a couple elements of figuring out what is the basic fabric of the universe to get to a point that if we can manipulate energy, these things are happening in tandem with why we're also starting to discover black holes that are bigger than what are supposed to exist, because then we know what to look for,
and we can fine tune the detection systems.
Yeah, down to the radio waves and
they want to build one that's like 20 stories tall and with 9 times the sensors, and they tune it every day by firing a neutron beam or something, a neutrino beam from a facility on the other end of the island of Japan, through like a known quantity of rock that they've conducted geological surveys over. So they have an idea of what it does, how it oscillates through solid matter, so that they can determine whether or not incoming neutrino beam waves have passed through planets. And so the idea is to be able to print a real-time, almost like a spectrogram of neutrinos.
Yeah.
And so we can see what's going on around us. We'll be able to turn it into the next generation of radio tomography or whatever it is.
And the telemetry that will be able to come from it will also extend beyond light.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's exactly.
We'll be able to find the end of the universe.
But this gets
the end of the
full circle. This gets back to the notion of neural networks or synapses, in that the synapses that are finally connected allow photons to travel and emissions to travel at the speed of light. In that, if we can start to get a map that's happening or that projects farther than our light can tell us and gives us more up-to-date examples, then we'll have like, you know, like in Prometheus when they do those holographic projections of where they're trying to estimate their travel path. That is the type of thing that's actually going to be possible because our estimates are going to be more accurate in line with real time beyond what our sensors are going to be, like our physical light sensors are going to be able to pick up.
Roughly 80 years to get a computer from the size of a warehouse down to the size of your watch. And at that rate, I think that we can take a neutrino sensor, planetary neutrino sensor, terrestrial neutrino sensor, down from the size of a mountain, down to the size of a car within the next 20 years. And if they can get it to the size of a car, then they can mount it on the front end of a spaceship, and they can get real-time telemetry of everything.
Yeah, and then, so I think,
and then we need to be able to collect that shit and find a way to power our fucking star drives because there's neutrinos everywhere.
So check it. What's happening
is like a giant lake of neutrinos.
Oh, for sure. That's what we need to be focused on the whole time in the first place. But what's happening at the same time as that is there's a generation of children who've been born with the access to that knowledge of these things happening, but also the understanding that those things are not useful if we don't survive as a species. So you have this crazy, like, young generation of people who have an imperative to save our species while also having more access to information than ever, in that they're developing, like, they have, like, if there's going to be a first class of people who become the Federation and have the, like, the fucking imperative to unify all living things in peace across and have a prime directive, it's going to be either these kids coming up or their kids, because they are realizing that they have to use their time and information wisely early on, because otherwise they like will die, and they know that. Down to, like, whether it's the school shootings or not, you have like 5 and 6 year old kids making living wills and shit, so they have this crazy awareness of mortality that I think it's existed before, but when it existed before, there also wasn't ethics. So, like, when mortality existed, like the awareness of mortality existed in the early 1900s, people would just have a bunch of kids to fucking do all the work, expecting that a couple of their kids were going to die. And it's not that they didn't give a fuck, it's that that's what happened. Now that our medicine's better, like, people have fewer kids, but the idea is that the average person can be more average because there's way more people that survive due to the better medicine, so there's not as much onus to be exceptional. And then on top of that, it's like way easier to be average and survive. So then the standard, like, we've hit this weird point where the medicine and science has created a period of stagnation for our genetic progression. And I think the problem is,
that's Stanley Kubrick's Baby in Space right there.
Right, yeah. But the problem is we've gotten so wrapped up in our own notions of progress that we're not even thinking about what the next stage of humanity looks like. We're too concerned with, like, basing it in, like, our constructs. Whereas the Star Child, as you're referring to, is like something that we couldn't even fucking fathom, and it looks at us as inferior. Oh, this is a good thing to connect to. So, I don't know if you saw the sequel to 2001.
Oh yeah, 2010.
And then basically like
these movies happened in the past now. I just want to say that because I think it's amusing.
Well, we can't really spoil it.
But they're but these movies conceptually happen so far in the future. Like in terms
to
of
them.
In terms of the way the society was envisioned, their version of the future, which is now our past, is so much more unified and forward-thinking and
maybe. And this is kind of where
I think to develop any kind of space program,
we got to give ourselves credit when we can.
But let's no, hold on. This is a interesting corollary. We made it to the moon in how many years? Like
depending on, I guess it depends on when you want to start.
Well, from when Kennedy's like, we're going to the moon.
It was
like no time
5
at all.
years.
Yeah, it was a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
Okay, we could get to Mars, like in that same kind of time frame. We probably, if we wanted to, if we were united socially and with a common goal, the way that the United States was at that point. And the way that it's like the way that China is right now and has been for the last 60 years, and the way that in a lot of ways ESA is demonstrating the kind of unity within Europe that they can pull together and create a space program that is they're doing shit that we should have been doing. NASA was supposed to be leading the charge.
Well,
we build robots that last a decade beyond their mission requirements.
So. Okay, I get what you're saying, but I think what has happened is I think the focus has changed in that it doesn't matter if we can get to Mars if we can't keep our shit together on Earth.
That I agree.
So this is one of the big things that I think has shifted in the past 50 years as far as like why NASA has taken a lot of their resources and focused them on terraforming, which actually... if it can't fix a planet, then it won't work for terraforming. So they're doing this double-edged sword. Yeah. So this is one of these things where they've been more focused on terraforming than colonizing, which is a much better approach to sustenance. So this is like, I don't think that there's been necessarily a lack of cohesion in that we've had to rely on the Russians to get to the space station.
I actually think that most of our efforts
we've been hitching rides with the Russians.
Most of our efforts in space involving people are like, I mean, I understand that is to study the effects of long-term exposure to being
so they
in
claim.
Space. So they claim. Well, that's probably I think that's still the only real reason to send people. I'm
not sure if that's it.
I don't think they need humans in space. I don't know if
that's it. Like, I have another theory, but you should go on.
I don't think that a human presence is necessary in space.
That's possible, but I think
that there are only a few conditions where you would actually need a human in space, and that's to make final decisions about things that you could only make in real time with present information. And so those are going to be like final, like, are we going to land or are we going to swing back around and try and head back to the planet, to Earth, kind of shit. That's the only time you really need a human on, like, right there. Otherwise, robots can do all that stuff.
Are you sure?
If they can't right now, then we need to make the robots that can to do it when we're ready to send the robot ship to the place to set up all this stuff.
So here's the issue. Are you familiar with the observer effect?
Yes.
Can a robot exhibit the same influence on physical space as a human during...
No.
Therefore, in tandem with the theory of relativity, what happens if you combine the observer effect with someone moving faster than other people while they're observing them?
They experience time dilation.
So, stay with me here. What happens if you keep someone observing people constantly at that speed?
Oh, you have omniscience at that point. You can see everything.
What's happened in the last 60 years?
Space flight.
What about information ubiquity concerning the people who've controlled the space flight? These things
It's consolidated. It's all part of the probably all part of the
how much of it
talks.
flows through fucking satellite fucking systems?
Oh, everything flows through satellites.
That have their calculations offset because they're moving so fast that they have to reset their timer because the time dilation makes it so that if they had the same clocks, they would lose seconds.
Yeah.
Or gain seconds in space, but the ones on Earth would lose seconds compared to the ones in space. So with all that together, when these people are basically in control of a fucking giant time dilation machine, what are the possibilities? And I'm not saying it's nefarious, because what else ultimately happened is if that is what's going on, because in my opinion, that experiment has to happen. If I can conceive of that experiment, somebody who's way fucking smarter than me can figure out a way to actually make that shit work. And actually apply that shit. And they're not going to just... If you can fucking make time dilate by just making somebody go fast, you're not just going to fucking leave that shit.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't.
So...
You have a time machine.
You have a time machine.
Well, no, you have a time machine that can only affect information.
It doesn't matter. It's still a fucking time machine. So, if I can conceive of a way that you theoretically stayed with me applying with it, and when I'm asking you what these things, and you're going with me, and that's what that ultimately is, and we have this international fucking space station with people constantly doing experiments that are constantly also able to observe us, you have to fucking entertain the possibility that there's a fucking time machine that's been built already, that's part of the reason why our technology started advancing so quick is because we figured out how to dilate time.
Yeah, but I feel like
somebody figured out how to dilate time.
The people that you would need on a control mechanism like that really are operators and technicians at some level, and
they don't have to know what each other's doing.
They don't have to know. They don't actually have to know what the machine does. They just have to keep it operating, keep it running.
It's at such a scale that the people building individual parts... We're talking about a planet-sized
quantum information engine of some sort.
People don't have to understand it, and they're building individual parts to build it.
Well, that's the whole... that's how secrets get leaked, because some group of contractors all work on similar projects, but don't know it until one of them blurred something out, and then everyone puts it all together, and they realize, wait a second, that's what that thing is?
So all that said...
That's what happened with, what was it, Google and government image identification, facial recognition software for the military.
Yep.
And then, and so Google was like, no. The employees said no.
Mm-hmm. Which is the only time we really find out about that shit.
Yeah.
Like the Snowden.
Yeah.
Because again, these are the types of things where I'm looking at all of the conspiracies that started in the 50s and 60s between the UFOs, I guess they started in the 40s, the UFOs, Bigfoot, and Illuminati and shit like that. We've had enough time to have enough evidence to say, call the bullshit where we can call the bullshit. So for the most part, 99% of UFO stuff is bullshit, and then the 1% that's not. Okay, so for example, they had that Navy release video.
Oh, with the crazy angular vector flight.
They still can't say that those things were not just anomalies on the imagery because there wasn't actual video footage of anything.
Let's be really clear about this. When most people say UFO, they're talking about some kind of alien origin, not of this Earth spacecraft that has incredible ability to do things that are beyond their perceived notion of what human flight is capable of. Mm-hmm. But a UFO can be anything that's an unidentified flying object.
Yeah.
So we can't, if we want to consider that it's an alien, we also should consider that it might be some kind of human-made flying machine that's incredible, that has inertial dampers and is next-generation technology because they've got their blueprints from our quantum information engine that's in orbit right now.
Exactly.
So I think that I want this to exist simply because it means that we've got a advanced technological resource that is being utilized to create reasonably accessible technology. And maybe there's a portion of it that can be utilized to make humanity have a better experience or better opportunities to have a better life. Not developed nation status. We're at a point that we shouldn't have developing nations where people are suffering. We should be able to figure this out.
Yeah. So I think in listening to you describe that, what I see is kind of emerging is like
we have enough information to see a big picture. Finally,
the God and the devil are the same thing.
Yeah.
In that the thing that is going to be able to solve all our problems is going to present all of these potential downfalls that we're going to have to like absolve ourselves of and abstain from in order to not just devolve into a society that's like completely hedonistic through digital means.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with hedonism, but once there's the potential for society to descend into complete hedonism through the computer, through the cell phone, through the fucking sex doll, like at some point it has to be acknowledged that those things are in tandem, and I don't think that you can separate them. So it becomes a matter of awareness to let people know, like, hey, if you get addicted to porn, your same synapses are firing in somebody who's addicted to heroin. You just don't fucking think it's the same because you're not using a needle or a fucking belt or some shit.
Yeah.
And that's where there's a sense of like, I think people want, like, I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with porn. But there is the capacity to get hooked on porn. Just the same as there's a capacity to get hooked on fucking sugar. Or things that are...
I think sugar's more accessible, so it might have a higher...
I don't know, is it?
Than porn?
Yeah. I feel like porn is like the most accessible thing now. Like... I mean, you're bombarded with it in a way that... multiple times a day, I bet you scroll past some shit where there's like tits.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like almost impossible.
There's always some kind of highly sexualized objectification of
women
present on the internet.
At least you can decide when you eat sugar.
Yeah, it's true.
To some extent, when you crave it. When you crave it, yeah. But that's again like that's the difference between being able to decide when you actually ingest something versus being bombarded with fucking visual images that are like pornographic 24/7. This is like, there's a level of what that does to people we don't even know yet.
The other day you asked me about like what does it take to have a quiet meal without being bombarded by media, and I thought about it later. The only way that I could actually prevent other media from interfering was to create a base level of noise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to create this base level of noise that allowed me to tune everything out. And because it was from a signal generator, I used a pink noise generator, because it was set to a certain decibel range in my headphones. I was able to tune everything else out, but I had to go to great lengths to do this, and it really wasn't fully, I was still being presented some kind of sensory stimulus. But it was really, I had to go to extra lengths. That's where we are now.
Yeah, yeah.
We can't turn off the devices.
And I think I'm wondering, what I've noticed too with watching some of these ghost shows is electromagnetic radiation causes nausea, paranoia, perception of people that are not there, voices, hallucinations. So like if that's the case, if we know now that a lot of these things are causing behaviors, then what's up with the fucking emission of electromagnetic fields that we're constantly bombarded to back to the fucking Legos, the field of Legos that we're swimming in that clearly fuck up birds and bees and shit to the point where they're just dropping out of the sky and they don't know what's happening. Yeah, the fuck we know what's happening is 4G and 5G, like, frying their brains or some shit to the point where, what the fuck is it? You know, that's where I'm like, I don't even know if I want 5G to go up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It gets to a point where I'm like, I think enough is enough concerning, you know, I never knew if I'd actually get to that point. But because technology advances quicker than our ability to understand its impact, I'm not comfortable with that shit getting rolled out when we don't know the true effects of 5G, let alone they're already working on 6G and shit. Like,
well,
fuck, man.
Considering how much opposition there's been to Chinese hardware technology going along with 5G, is just like, hey, we're handing our communications network to the Chinese, like, on a platter. Here's 340 million people who will eventually need to communicate on this network, and by the time that they're all there, we'll have 6G. And
if we're not already there, I mean,
yeah, we'll be at 7G.
I have another. I mean, I've seen enough compromises of hardware networks and routing centers that route shit back to China as to where I'm like, how much shit is not already going? Because, you know, how much of the fucking NSA's hardware was made in America?
Yeah.
How much of the NSA's hardware was made in America? I'm going to guess 20% maybe. Maybe 20% if we're lucky. So right there, you know that shit's already fucking compromised. Like, I mean, why wouldn't the Chinese government compromise that shit? Like, it's just a matter of if the American government was producing the hardware, we'd be fucking compromising that shit too.
I think that this notion that, I mean, I know that they're distinctly separate governments, but if we think of them differently as like different wings of an operation, of an industrial operation, and then it becomes an issue of like, you know, different branches, and they have to interact, and they have to work out the way that they're going to get, you know, the economic engine to keep moving.
I mean, I think that's what it boils down to ultimately, in that these dudes play, mostly dudes and a few women. They play nice and play golf together and fucking hang out. They're hanging out amongst each other, not amongst us.
Yeah.
On the weekends at these fucking G12, G20, whatever summits.
Summits where they have $1,500 Kobe steaks and you know, $600 glasses of some wine I can't pronounce.
So on that level, I don't think that they actually are against each other.
No, they're not.
So it feels like we're seeing the end, or I guess depending on how how honest or transparent history has been, the beginning of this cabal of nation state leaders that use each other's state examples as to keep their own people in line, or to say, oh, look what's happening in Hong Kong, you should be happy. They're chanting USA in fucking Hong Kong, knowing damn well it's fucking CIA agent provocateurs that started the chant.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where, you know, it's all kind of mind games.
I saw this TikTok of this dude walking around Hong Kong, like during the protests, like during it was a couple weeks ago, I think, or a week or and he was like, he had his like walkie-talkie out, blonde hair, did not look native at all. Like, I think he looked like an American. Didn't look like a tourist. um, he kind of looked like military.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there's a posture that they develop because of the way that they do their physical training.
Yeah.
And
they stick out their chest.
Yeah. And it was really interesting. He's like, it's just this video of this person with their cell phone. They're just watching this guy walk up and down the street, and he's like looking up and down places and talking on his radio. What the fuck's going on here? Who's this guy? Why is this guy in on the fucking protest? Who is he? Why does he seem like he's like running some show? What the hell's going on here?
Why is this dude here?
Fuck.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I've seen too many of those. I mean, they're not always like white guys necessarily, but
no, this is some blonde white dude, like
just depending on
his radio, walking up and down, coordinating with people in the street, like pointing his fingers at things. Like, what?
Yeah, but now we have enough information awareness to be able to have people take videos of that shit. Which is, again, I think this gets back to this notion of we have videos of that dude, but there's no fucking actual videos of Bigfoot. Like,
yeah.
I mean, so I think, like, as a critical mind sees all these things, and I think that there's definitely an element of we're getting smarter as a species and we're getting more ethical as a species, but we have to be aware of what's real in the context of, like, oh, here's a good example. I don't know, Brother Nature?
No.
So he's this guy who got famous for feeding deer in a park, but making it look like it was happening outside of a park. So there's a place where they have, like, you can go interact with deer that have been, like, desensitized to humans.
Yeah.
And he first got famous for, which is like, there's no big deal. That's not a big deal. I'm not making judgment about it one way or another. But then what recently happened was he put out a video. Well, he didn't put it out originally. There's a video that got shown of him getting beat up. And it was two videos actually. The first video was him getting beat up in a parking lot.
What?
And then the second video was him getting beat up inside of a restaurant, a sandwich shop. So then he comes out and tweets like, oh, there's like all these people saw me getting jumped and everybody stood around fucking videotaping it. Like, okay. So like when this shit first goes down, you're like, man, you feel bad for the guy, like, because he's not fighting back. It looks really shitty.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, why the fuck did this dude jump this guy? And then you're like, wait a minute, it's one guy both times, so it's like, I don't know if that really classifies as jumping. But, okay. And then you start to question it in your own head. And that's where I'm like, I'm looking at this as an example of one of those times where information comes out in a way that makes it difficult to know when you can, like, come down and be like, okay, I'm on this person's side or this person's side. And then you're like, why do I care anyway? But it's like, once again, in the sense of, like, when boredom hits, you allow yourself to be bombarded with things. So, like, in the course of analyzing this incident, I'm like, okay, there's probably gonna be some shit to put some more context to this. So I'm gonna, like, wait to judge, just for the sake of an exercise. And then, sure enough, the video comes out where this dude, Brother Nature, he was like talking shit to the people at the sandwich shop. Like, you don't know who the fuck I am. Like, I'm Brother Nature. And then somebody's like, nobody knows who the fuck you are, man. Just like, you know, I asked you don't know who the fuck he is. He's like an internet celebrity. Like, you know, if an internet celebrity, there's like a one in like fucking,
well,
you know.
A minimum of 10,000.
Well, if he's got 3 million followers, there's like a 1 in 200 chance.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That somebody knows him. That's not a high chance.
No.
That's higher than the average person, but that's not a whole lot of people.
But it's not,
like, when you break it down.
Most people's monkey sphere never approaches 150 people, the maximum. Right. Most people rarely even approach 100 people they regularly interact with, that they recognize and know, like, immediately, and have.
So even somebody who has 3 million people that follow this person regularly, out of 7.5 billion people, that's not a whole lot of people.
No.
So for somebody to assume that they're known, it's a really narcissistic thing. So this is how the incident actually started, apparently. And then the dude, I don't know if he's drunk or what, but I guess he challenged the guy to a fight, and then that's how they ended up outside. So
took it outside and got beat up some more.
Yeah, so then that's where I'm like, fuck, man, if you challenge somebody to a fight and then lose, that's not getting jumped.
That's just getting beat up.
Yeah, that's just losing a fight that you started, and then turning around and trying to sick your army on the dude to then make him look bad because you lost a fight. So that's where I'm like, man, this shit was like a weird manipulation of information. That then, because his army got sicked on the dude, he shut down his Twitter account. But ultimately, TMZ ran an article.
Wait, the other guy shut his Twitter account?
The guy that beat the shit out of the dude. But ultimately,
wait, this was about internet beef?
No, it wasn't internet beef.
Oh.
So this is why it's weird. This is why it's weird, because this is it becomes because news outlets start reporting on Brother Nature getting beat up, and then the stories are starting to become varied because he puts it out to try to get ahead of it, to try to make it a story. So then, some outlets are saying Brother Nature gets beat up and you should feel bad for him, and you should why isn't the Miami PD getting involved? But then other outlets are actually doing their research and finding out Miami PD actually showed up, but both of the people had left, so then they didn't pursue it any further. So then once all the other information comes out, it's like TMZ is one of the outlets that did the most accurate reporting on the situation, because the problem is fucking CNN and Fox and probably MSNBC reported on that shit too. So you can't have all of these quote-unquote news outlets reporting shit and then TMZ being the one that has the most factual information. That's not right. We can't have that, where CNN is feeling okay to report on internet beef, because it was real life beef that turned into internet beef, which then became the news that got reported, because all his army was retweeting it, how'd this happen? Why didn't the police do it? The fucking people were tagging Miami PD on Twitter and shit, and on Facebook, and all these people are tagging Miami PD.
How does the law? I'm sure Florida has its own exceptions for this, but I wonder how the law works if somebody challenges somebody to a fight.
It depends. Certain states have voluntary combat.
Oh wow.
Washington is one. I bet Florida might be.
I imagine Florida would be a voluntary combat.
Yeah, because what happens is in Washington
they've got
State,
standard ground
I
laws.
know in Washington State for a fact that if you challenge somebody for a fight, a cop will show up and fucking
mediate that shit.
Yeah, mediate it and let that shit happen. So it's just a matter of there's some states where grown people, I don't think
They can
kids
settle
can
with
do
fisticuffs.
it. Yeah, and they're wanting that to be the preference so that people don't escalate it to actual, like, if it's not regulated in some manner, then it can escalate because it's already illegal.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what the idea is behind it. So this is where in Miami, I bet if they find out that he challenged him to a fight and then lost the fight, basically, that he might even get charged with instigating or some shit.
Then
depending on their laws,
he might also be charged with something. He could get sued for like civil or defamation,
public nuisance, defamation, or incitement of violence.
Yeah,
like,
man,
there's all these things that he could be actually charged with if they move forward with, because he is now the information, because there's fucking cameras everywhere.
There are cameras everywhere.
There's fucking multiple angles. Now the information came out. He wasn't able to spin the narrative. This is the crazy part about it, is like, in the past, famous people were able to use their clout to spin the narrative to then destroy the small person before that shit even made it to light.
Yeah, but not anymore.
Not anymore. The truth is fucking gonna come out. So then that made me think of, like, one of the things that people have clearly forgotten. Do you remember when they tried to accuse Jamie Foxx of sexual assault?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't.
Did you ever read the fucking story?
No, because I didn't.
Dude,
because it was like, it was so fucking surreal. Like,
dude. So this is an interesting one because it's so fucking. Now that it's gone,
yeah,
we can discuss how ridiculous it was. He was accused of slapping a woman on the forehead with his dick.
Give someone a mushroom stamp.
That's what and the circumstances were never, like, made 100% clear of how it happened. But that is what the actual quote-unquote sexual assault that he was accused of was, as far as the stories that made it out. So this is where I'm like, when I saw that shit, because when I first heard he was accused of sexual assault, I'm like, what the fuck is happening right now, where, like, all this shit, because I'm like, I think he was married to Katie Holmes at the time, and I'm like, man, people are just fucked if this is true. Like, if this is true, like, what do guys need to be fucking happy? Like, you have to, like, what do you have to fucking be happy? You can't have it.
I don't know, man. Apparently someone cheated on Beyonce.
That's what I'm saying. Like, what do you have to be happy? Where it's like, you know,
when is enough enough?
Like, it's like, men are fucking horrible. But then you find out, like, okay, it's not that bad yet. It's not that bad. He didn't actually sexually assault anybody. And then the story just got swept under the rug as if that shit didn't happen. Like, when is anybody accountable for shit like that, where it was so clearly in the realm of the absurd, that the idea that it was an actual news story, that it was muddled so that people didn't realize how absurd it was in the first place, to then have it be swept under the rug that the news media outlets didn't try to slander that dude. Like, the fact that he didn't bring a lawsuit makes me think it happened, but it wasn't sexual assault whenever it happened. But it was like, somebody's like, oh yeah, this happened to me once, and there was a story about it that had circulated, and then somebody tried to fucking bring it forward as if he had sexually assaulted somebody, and then the person who it happened to was like, yeah, it happened, but it wasn't sexual assault, and that's why it got swept under the rug. That's what I think happened,
well, you know,
based on how it unfolded.
George Takei was accused of sexual assault, and he basically, like, was like, I did no such thing. That is a lie. Yeah, like, and he you know, he participated, and then it went away, because, like, once everyone starts talking, it's revealed that that's not what happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes people, I think a lot of things happen in these like cultural waves. You know, there's a everyone wants to go to the beach. Everyone wants to go to spring break. But spring break is this thing now that people just do, so nobody actually talks about it like, oh yeah, spring break. And I don't mean just like as an adult. It's just like, it's a thing that can be done. There's 2 months of the year where there's this giant party on all the beaches.
Yeah.
That's like a destination like theme thing now.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about
but
this.
it's not like it's at some point it'll come back into like cultural relevance the same way that music does. Because eventually we have like, you know, rock and roll will come back around because it will. Because some kids will discover punk rock and they'll be like, oh, this is awesome. Let's start a punk band.
Mm-hmm.
And they will. And they'll get some notoriety and it'll be the next wave of punk rock. And then it'll happen again with hip hop and it'll happen again with, you know, everything. Everything will get to have a resurgence at some point. Blue Jeans went out for a while and they came back. Giant Pants went out for a while, but they'll be back.
Yep.
Sweatsuits that are like presentable. Well, those don't ever leave. Actually, I think those things are kind of eternal. Those are like tuxedos, but
Sweatsuits never go out of style.
they only get more comfortable with time until they fade away and fall apart. And then the cycle is complete.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Radio is produced live in Sunroom Studios Space Capsule in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Random. Exceptional Radio.